Today's video is brought to you by MyHeritage, the #1 family history service to gain insight into our family trees. The site puts 19 billion records at your fingertips. I spent hours building out my family tree when I first started, and I found family leading all the way back to the 1600s. My dad and I discovered the name and picture of the ship my great-grandparents came to the United States on in 1930. It was fascinating to look up this ship. It has its own Wikipedia page. The crossing would have taken 5 days, as the SS Europa had just launched a few months before their journey and was state-of-the-art. Instant Discoveries is also an amazing feature that cross-references information from other family trees and databases to give you insights. Look how easily I found my great-grandfather's gravestone and image. You can also clean up, enhance, and even animate these old photos that you find. I've been using MyHeritage for years to create the facial animations that you see at the end of our videos. And from the comments, it seems to be everyone's favorite thing, seeing these old faces come to life. Sign up for a 14-day free trial and enjoy all the amazing features MyHeritage has to offer. Scan the QR code or click the link in the description below and start exploring your family history today. Hello everyone, and welcome back to Royalty Now, where we bring you face-to-face with figures from the past and talk about their history. Julius Caesar is a legendary name that has been both idolized and hated throughout the centuries. But who was he really? A tyrant? A savior? Or just a man? His story is one of intense drama, endless ambition, utter brilliance, and brutal betrayal. Today, we'll talk about the life of a young Julius Caesar, and then reveal what he may have looked like in the prime of his life. So let's go ahead and get started. Gaius Julius Caesar, who we'll be calling Caesar, was born on July 12th, 100 BCE, to his father, whom he was named after, and his mother, Aurelia. Raised mostly by his mother, who was known for her beauty and common sense, Caesar would grow up being told that he was destined for greatness, that he was different from everyone else, that he was special. In reality, although he was intelligent and did have ancient Roman lineage, Caesar's family, the Julii, had fallen from grace and hadn't produced a distinguished member in over a century. By the time Caesar was born, Rome's republic had become a corrupt and violent machine, which was ruled only by a few, the Senate. Most of these men, who called themselves the best ones, were rich and powerful and wanted nothing more than to keep it that way. Yet some senators still held on to the ideals that Rome's true power was with the people, and they called themselves the populares. These two groups would begin tearing Rome apart from within, and in 88 BCE, when Caesar was 12 years old, it led to a civil war. The leaders of the two factions were Caesar's uncle, Gaius Marius, who was a populares, and Lucius Cornelius Sulla, who was one of the best ones. After a dispute about who should command the Roman army, Sulla would, for the first time in Roman history, march an army into Rome. The move was unthinkable, and it was seen by most as the ultimate threat to Rome's republic. Caesar's uncle, Marius, would be exiled, but was able to return and seize Rome after raising an army with his ally Cinna. Marius, Cinna, and the Senate would declare Sulla a public enemy and exact brutal justice on his troops and supporters for the sin of marching on Rome. When the dust settled, Marius and Cinna would be co-leaders of Rome, called consuls. Yet only 2 weeks after the election, Marius would die unexpectedly of old age, leaving all of his power and influence to Cinna and his followers. It's around this time that we can see Caesar make his first impact on history, when Cinna, the most powerful man in Rome, chose him to marry his daughter Cornelia. Cinna would also appoint the young Caesar to one of the most prestigious priesthoods in Rome, the Flamen Dialis, or special priest of the god Jupiter. But this appointment, although prestigious, came with an enormous amount of restrictions, including never being able to join the army and never entering Roman politics. Why Cinna would offer his now son-in-law a position that barred him from political life is not really understood. But it may give us a glimpse into what Cinna thought of Caesar's future prospects. This position was the best Caesar could hope to have. He would accept, how different history would have been if Caesar was just allowed to live this life. But fate had other plans. In 84 BCE, Caesar's father, who had only recently retired in order to finally spend time with his family, died suddenly one morning while tying his shoes. Caesar was now legally his own man, the head of his household. Although he still had his mother to help guide him, it would be the next few years of life's twists and turns that helped form him into the man he would become. These twists began only months after his father's death, when Cinna, Caesar's father-in-law, was killed by his own men in a mutiny. This power vacuum allowed Sulla, who had been gone for years fighting in Greece and Asia, to land his massive army back in Italy, march on Rome, and declare himself dictator. Sulla's return marked a period of brutal vengeance in Rome for the things Marius and Cinna had done to Sulla's supporters all those years before. Sulla would compile a list of his enemies, demanding their execution or exile. As the son-in-law of Sulla's worst enemies, it was no surprise that Gaius Julius Caesar was on his list. Sulla stripped Caesar of his inheritance and demanded that he divorce Cornelia, resign from his priesthood, and leave Rome for good. Many other men had been punished in this way and saw it as a mercy compared to the alternative of a swift death. But Caesar was not just any man. In an insane, almost idiotic show of boldness, Caesar refused to be arrested by this self-proclaimed dictator. Now, we don't really know why he did this, whether it was out of loyalty to his wife, or it being a matter of dignity and respect. Maybe he just hated Sulla. Whatever it was not received well. By the next morning, orders were issued for Caesar's arrest, but he was long gone by the time they arrived. For the next year, Caesar would live roughly, hiding in the hills of central Italy, hunted by Sulla's men. He was forced to sleep in a different place every night, and at one point he nearly died of malaria. Caesar would suffer seizures later in his life, and some historians believe they may have started with this illness. Back in Rome, Caesar's mother, Aurelia, and her side of the family argued for his life, since many of her family members had been loyal to Sulla. Finally, they were able to convince him that Caesar was a nobody, just an insignificant boy trying to pretend to be a man. Sulla would pardon the young Caesar and allow him to remain married, but his position as a priest would be taken away. Although he was thankful to be alive, Caesar's year on the run from Sulla made it a little hard for him to feel safe in Rome. He would decide instead to leave, and now that he was free from his restrictions, he joined the Roman army. In the army, Caesar found his true calling. Incredibly, less than a year into his military career, he would be awarded the Roman equivalent of the Medal of Honor, the civic crown, after saving Roman lives at the siege of Mytilene. This honor was never given lightly and commanded an intense respect. It even required by law that men much more senior to the wearer get up and applaud when he entered a room. This power and recognition was like a drug to Caesar, and he would become obsessed with feeling it again. Caesar would spend the next 3 years in what is now Turkey, learning how to soldier and how to lead men. In 78 BCE, when Caesar was 22, Sulla finally passed away. Caesar would return to Rome almost immediately after hearing the news, not only excited to be back home, but also to begin making a name for himself. Only weeks after arriving, he would begin his public life by becoming an advocate, essentially the equivalent of a prosecutor in today's world. Much like today, trials were watched by many of the public, who were intrigued by the drama of it all. Advocates would use this drama in order to show off their skills as an orator. In Caesar's first case, his closing speech was so good that it even impressed the man who was considered the greatest orator of all time, Cicero. It was not just the words of the speech, which no longer survive for us to see today, but it was the way that Caesar performed it that fascinated his audience. According to Adrian Goldsworthy, public speaking in Rome was very much like being an actor. It was about how the orator stood, how he dressed, how he held himself, letting his toga fall just in the right way, his expressions, his power, and his tone of voice. These things were all just as vital as what he was saying. All things that a 23-year-old Caesar seemed to understand inherently. Although he lost the case, Caesar's famous speech thrust him into the limelight of Rome. In an effort to stand out even more, he would begin to dress distinctly, even provocatively by Roman Senate standards. His distinct fashion sense, perfectly trimmed hair, and close-shaven face began to be seen as excessively vain, catching the ire of the more conservative senators. Yet unlike many of the young aristocrats that Caesar was being compared to, he was never seen overindulging himself on food or wine, even at his own lavish parties. Everything from his dress to his attitude, even the fine pieces of art in his home that he couldn't afford, were calculated efforts by a young Caesar to stand out, to be noticed, to start a conversation. In 75 BCE, he would once again leave Rome, this time to study under the greatest teacher of rhetoric in the known world, Apollonius Molo, in Rhodes. But before he was able to reach Rhodes, he was taken prisoner by pirates, who would often take young and rich Romans and then ransom them back for money. Yet even with his life in hostile hands, Caesar never seemed to lose his cool. As his days in captivity went on, he kept a calm and superior air around his captors, which they actually found hilarious. Eventually, Caesar was able to charm them enough to let him live among them as a near equal. When the time came for the pirates to demand an actual price for Caesar to be released, they would agree on 20 talents. But when they told him his price, he laughed, almost insulted, and insisted that they ask for 50 instead. After 38 days in captivity, Caesar was released. Yet before he left them, Caesar turned to the pirates and promised all of them that he would return and kill them all. Of course, they laughed in his face. But when Caesar returned shortly after, they realized he wasn't kidding. He would capture every single one of them and had them all crucified, just as he had promised. But as a small token of their friendship, he slit all of their throats so they would die quick deaths. This story of Caesar's life would become famous, revealing him exactly as he was: confident, calm, collected, witty, and ruthless. Yet it also showed a sliver of empathy for his enemies, something that would become a huge part of his story later in life. Caesar finally did reach Rhodes, where his teacher Molo praised him as one of the best orators he had ever taught. It was clear that he could make a career out of this, but for Caesar, public speaking was merely a tool, a means to an end. Back in Rome, Caesar would be invited to join the College of Pontiffs, one of the most prestigious religious bodies in Rome. It also helped a lot with public perception. Although Caesar had been raised in the slums of Suburra and was way more connected to the struggle of the common man than your average senator, this new position brought a whole new level of respect from the people, who now saw Caesar as a man who was personally favored by the gods. It was around this time that he met Rome's richest and most powerful men, Marcus Licinius Crassus and Pompey the Great. Crassus was a shrewd and utterly ruthless businessman. Despite not being very well liked, he commanded an intense respect, mostly because nearly everyone, including Caesar, owed him money, and he was not one to forget. Pompey, on the other hand, was seen as a hero of Rome. His charismatic leadership and success in battle made him popular and someone to look up to. But those who knew Pompey well knew him as a calculating and jealous man who would do anything to keep himself in power. Naturally, Crassus and Pompey despised each other. Nevertheless, they would be elected to rule Rome together, becoming joint consuls in 70 BCE. Caesar would become a vocal supporter of the two, keeping a close watch on their relationship. At 30, Caesar was already showing great promise. But Roman politics were a rich man's game, and even Caesar himself was starting to doubt how long he could keep playing. To make things worse, in 69 BCE, Cornelia, his wife since he was just 15 years old, died suddenly. Although we don't know the cause, most historians believe it's due to the birth of their only daughter, Julia. Caesar was heartbroken, and he would give his wife a grand public funeral. Although the popular image of the Romans tends to see them as serious, unemotional people, the reality is that Romans were often deeply sentimental, and Caesar's speech in his wife's honor is said to have moved many of those in attendance. Understandably, even after leaving Rome to a posting in Spain, Caesar's mental health was still in a fragile state. In what is now Cadiz, Caesar is said to have come across a statue of Alexander the Great and began to weep. When Alexander was Caesar's age at the time, he had already conquered half the world, while Caesar had conquered nothing. He would start having horrible, disturbing dreams of betraying his beloved mother Aurelia and even hurting her. These dreams would distress him so much that he would go to visit a soothsayer, who interpreted his dreams as those of a man who was destined to rule, with his beloved mother being a symbol for Mother Earth. This interpretation hit Caesar hard. His mother had always told him he was special, and only when he began to doubt himself did the gods give him a vision. Now, we don't really know how religious Caesar truly was, but this moment did seem to change him. When he returned back to Rome, he was a changed man, a man with a destiny, one that no one could deny him. In 65 BCE, Caesar would be elected to a position that made him responsible for the upkeep of the city of Rome and public buildings. Yet he would use the opportunity to hold public games, paying for them out of his own pocket. His knack for style at these events earned Caesar an insane amount of popularity with the Roman people, but it had come at a price. By the time it was all said and done, Caesar was now 1,200 talents in debt, the equivalent of $30 million today. Yet, if you asked Caesar, the price was a bargain for what he gained in return. In 63 BCE, Caesar was running for the position of Pontifex Maximus, the Roman equivalent of the Pope, that was voted on by the people of Rome. Like many times before, older senators did not take Caesar's election campaign seriously, but he always bet on himself, and in the process took on more and more debt. Knowing he would never be able to fully pay it off if he lost the election, he was now gambling with his own life. On the day of the election, he kissed his mother Aurelia goodbye and told her that he would return home as Pontifex Maximus, or not at all. In the end, it was close, but Caesar came out the winner, returning home to his mother as the most powerful man in Roman religion. But this underdog win earned the jealousy of many older Roman senators and made him enemies like Marcus Porcius Cato, who would become Caesar's longest rival. In 62 BCE, during a debate about an attempted coup, Caesar was accused of involvement. Cato, having seen Caesar receive a note, assumed it was from the conspirators and demanded that it be read aloud. It turned out to be a love letter from Cato's sister Servilia, embarrassing Cato and weakening his accusations. By the end of the day, Caesar had somehow emerged as the most reasonable and most measured man in the room. But underneath this cool exterior, there was still a man who was drowning in debt, whose immense ambition required more and more resources to keep up the facade. Although he would go on to lead a very profitable military campaign throughout Spain, his debt barely budged. He needed more. At the age of 40, Caesar finally reached the minimum age allowed for a man to run for consul, the most powerful position in Rome. Yet, even though Caesar had used the last decade to grow into a masterful politician, he still had many enemies in the Senate, and he knew even if he was elected, Cato and his allies would deny him the glory of doing anything meaningful while he was in office. He needed more, and he knew just who to get it from. Although Pompey and Crassus had once co-ruled Rome, they had ended their consulship as hateful enemies, failing to achieve nearly anything they had put their rivalry aside for. They had felt the pain of a failed consulship, something that Caesar himself was now facing. Behind closed doors, Caesar would ask for the three to meet, and was somehow able to convince these men, who lacked neither money nor power, that he was the solution to all of their problems. Caesar would be elected as consul in 59 BCE, And with Crassus' money and Pompey's prestige manipulating things behind the scenes, there was nothing that the Senate could really do. Caesar would pass laws that gave land to homeless veterans. He punished corruption more severely, and he provided debt relief and new jobs to the poorer classes. With every passing reform, Caesar gained more and more love from the people, and more hatred from the Roman elite. As the alliance between the three men grew more obvious, it became clear how formidable Caesar had become. From a young man on the run for his life to becoming one of the most powerful men in Rome, Caesar's journey to this moment had been marked by his relentless ambition and utter brilliance, mixed, of course, with an immense amount of luck. Yet for Caesar, he needed more. In Part 2, we'll explore Caesar's ascent to unparalleled power, where Caesar's confidence turns into arrogance and his ambition turns into greed. Now, let's talk about a question that has fascinated scholars for centuries. What did Julius Caesar truly look like? This topic is still hotly debated, but luckily for us, Roman artistic tradition at this time was unique, focusing on realism rather than idealism, and creating portraits that showed character rather than just physical beauty. In fact, Romans considered it a sign of character to show these physical imperfections in their portraits. We have just one agreed-upon statue of Caesar from his lifetime, the Tusculum bust, actually unearthed in the 1800s by Napoleon's younger brother, Lucian. It shows a handsome face with strong cheekbones, a wrinkled neck, thinning hair, and an interesting head shape. This image aligns with descriptions from Suetonius, who, although writing over 100 years after Caesar's death, provides us with one of our few detailed accounts. It also matches images from coins struck during Caesar's rule. Suetonius describes Caesar as tall, with fair skin, slender limbs, and a face that always looked a little too full. His piercing dark eyes were particularly striking. We have every reason to believe that Julius Caesar was quite a handsome man during the prime of his life. He was very successful with women, and maybe even men, conducting countless love affairs, including one with his ally Crassus' wife. Although the Tusculum portrait is widely accepted as the representation of an older Caesar, other busts like the Pantelleria and Arles may offer a better depiction of his younger years, and in my opinion show more refined artistry. They have the same strong chin, neck wrinkles, and specific cheek dimples that we see consistently across images of Caesar. Scholars have found huge similarities between these images, pointing towards them all being made during his lifetime. For a younger image of Caesar, I've composited these three portraits: Tusculum, Pantelleria, and Arles. So, let's check out the face of a young Julius Caesar now. And let's look at a modern-day version. Some of you may remember this image from way back when. It's the image that truly launched royalty now, and I'm super happy to be able to pay homage to it now. Of course, I feel more skilled now, so let's see a revised version. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to scan the QR code to start your free 14-day trial of MyHeritage today. We'll see you all for the next video.